Okay, we're going to talk through a basic squat progression, and we'll talk through when you'll want to choose different versions and why, whether it's for specific training purposes or if you have specific outcomes you're trying to improve in a rehab process, or just helping a player to have better proprioception or understanding of how they move in space. Okay, so first thing you're going to do is an air squat. Okay, so how to coach an air squat. First, you start from the ground up. So you get your feet in approximately a shoulder width stance. And so what you want to do is, in order to create the maximum torque, your body needs to be able to create an external rotation force. Okay? If you already externally rotate by pointing your toes out too far, you have no more space for creating an external rotation force. You can't really twist on that. Try to put your toes out really far and then see how far you can really twist your hips. You can't. You just can't. That means you have no power in the system. If you can't squat with your toes more forward, then you won't have any power. Okay? You might be able to reach a position, but you'll have no power. So you want about a shoulder width stance or straight down from your hands. And your toes can be just slightly pointed out. The reason you slightly point them out is so that you can get your femurs going out to get out of the way of your hips. Okay? So depending on the anatomy of your hip, some people can squat with more feet straight, and some people need a slightly pointed out stance. So you get the stance correct first, approximately shoulder width. The more straight your feet can be, the more you can externally rotate and create an external rotation force for more torque in the system. Okay? So once your stance is set, you need to learn how to brace. So you'll start with glute squeeze. Take a deep breath to inhale, expand your belly 360. I'm not pushing it out, I'm just feeling that expansion in the rib cage and in the belly to create intra-abdominal pressure. Okay? So this braces the spine and prepares you to do a squat. Okay? So this air squat is the first step in the progression to initiate this movement. Once I'm in the proper stance and I can inhale properly to brace, then how I'm going to initiate this movement is I'm going to break at the hips and the knees at the same time, okay? While keeping my belly button in my chest facing forward as much as I can. And naturally, as I squat down, my hands can come forward or up in order to give myself a counterbalance, okay? A note on foot pressure before I start this movement to demonstrate it for you is you always want your big toe gripping the floor. That means pressing down into the floor to keep the arch active. In order to do this, you press your big toe down, and you want to keep the weight balanced across from toe to heel, so it's like the weight is coming down the center of the foot. Okay? So my feet are shoulder width. I breathe in, brace, I press my big toe down, then I break at the hips and the knees at the same time as if I'm sitting on a chair. Okay? So I'll give you a side view here. As I squat down, I'm going to break at the hips and the knees at the same time. I'm going to continue to reach my hips back and bend my knees forward. As I squat down, this is a full squat depth. Okay? My knees continue to push out, activating my glutes. Another cue you can use here is to spread the floor as you squat down and as you stand up. Okay? This is a basic squat, full depth. The hip crease goes below the knee. Okay? So it's natural for people for their knee to come forward across the toe if necessary. It's also natural to have to get a little bit of an angle forward. Okay? You want your back angle and your shin angle to be as similar as possible. Okay? Now, errors you will find when you do this is whenever a player is missing any kind of hip mobility, whether they're missing the ability to extend the hip, or if they're missing internal rotation of the hip or external rotation of the hip, you'll see difficulty in this movement. Okay? If they're missing external rotation or activation of the glutes, you'll immediately see this internal vagus error. Okay? So to breathe, to brace, and to create that external rotation force, practice gripping the floor and pressing those knees out as you initiate that movement. okay? Toes should always remain on the floor, okay? If you're missing this internal rotation of the hip, then at some point, as you squat down, you're gonna see the knees come in because that lack of internal rotation is limiting your ability to squat fully, okay? It can also be the glutes turn off as you squat, but oftentimes players are missing this internal rotation of the hip. So that shows you that this, whatever they can maintain a good position to, is your proper depth, okay? But until a player can squat fully down below parallel, they're not prepared to move on to the next step in this progression, okay? You have to be able to demonstrate control in a body weight squat before you're prepared to do a significant load of any type of a weighted squat, okay? You can introduce light loads to help get to positions that you want to develop, but you can't go crazy heavy loads if you're training a bad pattern. The pattern comes first, the technique comes first. After that comes load and adaptation and building the strength of that athlete, okay? So again, feet shoulder width, toes can be slightly out, and then you break at the knees and the hips at the same time, and you continue to reach back like you're sitting on a chair as you squat down until you reach below parallel. Knees are always pressing out, toes are always pressing down to keep that arch active, and you really press the knees out as you stand up, okay? The better you can teach this air squat, the better the remaining progressions will go, because these are the basics, the fundamentals of a squat, okay? After you have good quality control and technique in an air squat, and you're able to do it at volume, you can do it at speed and under control, then as a coach you can consider adding weight. The next progression is a goblet squat, okay? You can hold it here, or you can hold it here underneath the chin, okay? So the goblet squat is exactly the same as an air squat, okay? The only thing that's different is you have this load that's in front of the body, okay? So in order to keep the center of mass over the center of your foot, then you'll find that this is going to create a demand for a more upright posture, just like a front squat. So as I squat, I'm going to keep my elbows directly underneath the weight to support the weight, okay? If it dips down, it becomes difficult, it's going to pull my body down, okay? If I have it too high, then I might get a hyperextension here. I keep them directly under the weight, and everything else is the same as far as what you say in order to coach this movement. It's still breaking at the knees and the hips at the same time. It's still gripping the floor with the toes, and it's still squatting down below parallel. But because there's an added weight in the front, you want to see the center of mass or even this weight come over the center of the foot, which will demand more of an upright posture, okay? So this is the goblet squat, and the more you can do it with feet straight, the better torque and power you will have in this movement, okay? That's a goblet squat. As long as you coach the air squat well in the warm-up and whenever you're teaching a normal bodyweight squat, the faster it will go in teaching and demonstrating the goblet squat, because players will already understand exactly how they need to move with the weight in front, okay? Once you have seen good control and technique in a goblet squat and an air squat, then you're prepared to move on to a barbell squat, okay? We start with a barbell back squat because there's not a significant demand on a change in position, okay? A front squat or an overhead squat adds an element of difficulty in the position that a developing player is not prepared to take on yet. And so there's two different positions that you can keep the bar for a barbell back squat, okay? First position is a high bar back squat. That's directly on top of the traps. It's directly behind that bone that sticks out at the base of the neck, okay? The second position is a low bar back squat, okay? When would you use each one? A high bar back squat keeps your body more upright, which is naturally going to load the quadriceps more, okay? A low bar back squat is going to limit how deep you can go, but it loads the posterior chain, the hamstrings and the glutes and the lower back more, and it helps you keep more of a vertical shin if that is what you're doing to try to train the front of the knee or deload the quads, or you're trying to train the posterior chain more. You'll try to use a low bar back squat, okay? But oftentimes we want to use the high bar back squat more frequently, specifically for players in athletic movement, because it helps you maintain more of an upright position. Usually the low bar back squat is only if you're dealing with you're trying to offload the knee, you're trying to avoid knee pain, or if you're more like a powerlifting athlete trying to build that posterior chain strength, okay? More on that later. So in a high bar back squat, you're gonna start, you reach forward, and then you bring your hands just slightly outside of shoulder width. Okay, you want the same width for each hand. And as you come through, you squeeze those shoulder blades together and place that bar directly on top of the traps. Okay, notice both of my feet are underneath because this is the beginning of my lift. Okay, I'm facing you so that you can see the position here. Okay, my hips are directly under the bar. My knees are externally rotated, toes are pressing down, deep breath. And then I can lift off. Normally you'll take just 1 or 2 steps back. Now I'm in my squat stance. From here, everything is exactly the same as an air squat. You just have a load on your back, okay? So you need to keep that upper back stiff, and you need to keep those elbows straight down as you do this lift. When the elbows come up, your body comes forward, your chest comes forward, and it becomes very difficult, okay? What do you do with your head in this movement? You want to keep your eyes looking straight forward in order to avoid any sort of excessive back extension or hyperextension there, okay? So keep the eyes straight forward, and if you coach your squat well in the air squat and the back squat, then, or in the goblet squat, then the back squat becomes easy, okay? So I have this in position, my elbows below, gripping that bar nice and tight. From here, I'm going to break at the knees and the hips, and I'm going to lower down, looking straight ahead, pressing those knees out until I reach below parallel, and then I'll squat back up, okay? Find that position that works good for you, okay? Unless it's otherwise specified in the programming, a back squat is always full depth, okay? If you want to develop certain elements of the back squat, like the shorter range, this is called a quarter back squat, or I'll do a parallel back squat when the thigh is just parallel to the floor and back up, okay? But unless it's specified in the exercise name, then it's always be full depth, because we want players to develop a full expression of their range of motion and having power and speed through every part of their range of motion, okay? So that's a back squat. That's the next step in the progression, okay? Now, after you master the back squat, to give a different sort of training, a different sort of stimulus in order to further develop your core stability, in your posterior strength, and involving the upper body, like an upper body isometric, you can do a front squat, okay? So this front squat position, what does it demand? It demands a full ability for external rotation of the shoulder. If a player is missing this external rotation, then it will be impossible to get into a proper front rack. It does not matter what their forearm mobility is. If they're missing external rotation, they can't get into a front rack position, okay? Also, if the tricep or the elbow is very stiff in a player, or even if they got stiffness in the upper back and the lat, you'll find difficulty getting in this fully externally rotated position. But to coach this, you always start with a stick. So I'll grab a stick. Okay, you want to see a demonstration of good technique before you load anything on the bar, because even with an empty barbell, it can put unneeded pressure on the wrist, which we don't want. Okay, so we'll train this. You have a full grip on the bar. You place it under the chin, and this is uncomfortable when you practice it, but this gives players an idea of what it takes to get into that front position. So I'll start with the stick, and you get to get this slightly outside shoulder width stance, I'll get my hands about a thumb width away from the hips on this, and then I'll bring the bar or the stick up to my chin. I wedge it under the chin, and then what you're gonna do is press those elbows up, releasing the grip so that the stick is really only on the fingers, okay? So as I release that grip, I want my triceps or my upper arm to be parallel to the floor. This is my front squat position, and I need to maintain this front rack position as I squat down in the squat. So as you get here, the foot position is exactly the same as the air squat, as the goblet squat, and as the back squat. Now, I just need to squat down, okay? Same cues as the air squat, repeat those whenever you do it, okay? As you do this, you have to continue to press those elbows up, and you might have to give a cue at the bottom to initiate the stand-up motion with your elbows so the elbows don't drop. So if I initiate with the elbows, it keeps me upright. Otherwise, an error you might see is they lift at the hips first, and notice what that does with the elbows. The elbows are now dropping. The pressure is coming on top of the forearm, which you feel in your wrist, okay? So, but once they can master that full range of motion, full down and full up with good technique, with a stick, then you can move to the barbell. With the barbell, you get that just outside shoulder width, full grip. A note on if they're struggling with mobility and you still want to train this, if a player is struggling to get full elbow height in that front rack, you can have them release the pinky first in this grip. If that's a struggle, you can release that ring finger, that second finger. But always keep at least 2 fingers on the bar, okay? So, but if you can do a full front rack position with 4 fingers on the bar, that's better. If you have to release the pinky, no problem, okay? But I'd rather players keep all 4 fingers if possible, so that we can even get to further progressions like Olympic lifting later, okay? So, same thing, now it's sitting on the shoulders, okay? Notice how high my elbows are. If my elbows are this high, the bar can only sit on the shoulders. If my elbows are low, now the pressure is coming on the wrist. We don't want that, okay? Elbows high, squat full down and full up. The elbows do not drop. You keep pressing those elbows up. That works the shoulders, okay? This is the front squat, okay? The front squat is incredibly useful for building more core stability and developing the quadriceps, and oftentimes for taller players, it's easier for them to use because taller players with longer femurs may struggle with the back squat, okay? The last part of the progression is an overhead squat. To train the overhead squat, you first have to get a proper overhead position with a stick. So, to know how wide your hands need to be, you should be able to hold the bar and it's at your waistline. If it's below, your hands are too narrow, okay? So get it wide enough that it's here, directly overhead. You want to push up on the bar, get slightly upward pressure with your traps. You want to externally rotate the shoulders so that the armpits are showing and the elbows are pointing down, okay? If players struggle with mobility in the ankle or the hip, not only will they struggle with the air squat, the goblet squat, the back squat, and the front squat, if you have struggle with mobility in the ankle or the hip, the overhead squat will be impossible. It'll be impossible to maintain this overhead position. So tight grip on that bar, and then from here, you want to see that chest facing forward as you squat down and up, okay? You want to display control, being able to keep that bar directly over the midline, over the center of the foot. You see from top to bottom, over the center of the foot, okay? You always want to see that bar stacked over the midline, over the center of the foot. This is a squat progression. And so, these are the basics of the squat progression. When you might need to use different versions of this squat progression is whenever you want to train a specific weakness, or maybe whenever you're trying to fix an asymmetry. An asymmetry is when one side is stronger or is moving better than the other side. So you might use versions like a split squat or a rear foot elevated split squat in order to develop strength in one side at a time. Or you might put, if you want an increased range of motion, you might have a front foot elevated split squat, okay? Or you might put a staggered stance squat to work on getting development in different ranges of motion, different positions, okay? Or if you're struggling with mobility and you want to work on training the quads without putting stress on the back, you might raise the heel for a Cossacks or a heel elevated squat, okay? Or we might even throw in a Cossack squat because this is a single-sided leg exercise that lengthens the adductor, okay? So depending on what you're trying to train, you'll adjust the different versions of the squat, but it's always a clear start and end position for these types of movements of a squat, okay? A note on the low bar back squat is it's quite useful to throw in a box squat, limiting the range of motion so that you can keep the shin vertical and you want to engage the posterior more, okay? So you'll keep a box and you're squatting just to the box, you're limiting the range of motion, you're going tempo so that I can keep that shin vertical with a low bar position and standing up, okay? So you change the position of the squat in order to develop specific things that you want to in the player, working on their weaknesses or avoiding pain, okay? So a note on these squats, whenever a player is just starting out, they're beginner, or if they're coming back from rehab, both, you'll use this basic squat progression to help build control, but you start with tempo or slow movement and you add isometrics. You're pausing at different positions in the squat so they can find control, or you're pausing at the bottom before standing up. But every time that we're coming up in the squat, whether it's an air squat or anywhere up the progression, we always want to stand up with speed. That's intent. We want speed of contraction. We want power coming up with proper technique, okay? Whether it's a minimum weight or a maximum weight, we want that bar to almost come off the shoulders. We want the feet to almost come off the ground because we want that kind of speed. That's training the concentric motion of the muscle. It's developing that speed and power of change in direction and strength, okay? So this is a basic squat progression. We're going to build on this. This is a category 1 movement with clear start and end point of motion. You always start at the beginning of the progression. If a player can't display control in a specific loaded one, then go backwards in the progression until they can display good quality movement and control in the earlier parts of the progression.